She was 23 years old and had never truly fallen in love. Until the day her best friend's older brother came back to town and turned her entire world upside down. He was 10 years older, impossible to ignore, and completely forbidden. But some things don't need to make sense to be inevitable. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our passionate stories. The scent of freshly ground coffee mingled with the warm aroma of cinnamon and vanilla rising from the muffins coming out of the oven. Anabelle Holland took a deep breath, letting that familiar fragrance fill her lungs as she adjusted the navy blue apron over her white blouse. 7 a.m. in Santa Barbara, and the Sunset Beans Cafe already pulsed with that cozy energy of a place that wasn't just a coffee shop, but a piece of home for everyone who stepped inside. The wide windows allowed the golden Californian sunlight to flood the space, illuminating the light wooden tables, the hanging plants in the corners, and the framed motivational quotes that Megan insisted on changing every week. The place had soul. It had history. And Anabelle stood right at the center of it all, just as she always had. Her fingers brushed over the Italian espresso machine her father had bought years ago. A pricey relic, but one that brewed the best coffee in town. Anabelle knew every button, every sound, every mood that machine had. She knew exactly how to steam the milk until it turned into that perfect creamy foam. She knew the precise measure of coffee beans for each drink. She knew the customers by name, by order, and sometimes even by the problems they carried along with their need for caffeine. The Sunset Beans wasn't just a business. It was an urban confessional, where people came not only for coffee, but to talk, vent, laugh, sometimes cry. And Anabelle listened to it all, patiently, with sarcasm when needed, with that brutal honesty that made people either adore her or feel mildly offended, but they always came back. "Good morning, sweetheart." The voice came from the back door, soft, yet filled with that unmistakable presence only mothers who know every inch of their daughter's soul possess. Anabelle turned her head and smiled. Megan Holland, at 49, had the serene beauty of a woman who'd lived long enough to know what truly matters and what's just noise. Her light brown hair was tied in a low ponytail, a few silver strands she refused to dye because, as she put it, they were survival medals. She wore a sand-colored linen blouse and perfectly fitting jeans. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply existed with that natural grace that made people instantly trust her. "Morning, Mom. You brought reinforcements." Megan raised a basket covered with a checkered dish towel and smiled. "Cranberry and orange. Muffins. Your father woke up at 5 this morning inspired. I tried to convince him to go back to bed, but you know how he gets once an idea hits." Anabelle chuckled softly, taking the basket and setting it on the counter. The smell was divine. Ezra Holland was an engineer by profession, but a baker at heart. He always had been. On weekends, he would take over the kitchen and create recipes that Megan later sold at the cafe. It was a partnership that had worked perfectly for over 20 years. He should have been a chef, not an engineer. I say that every week, but he likes building bridges and baking bread. Apparently, the two aren't mutually exclusive. Megan pulled off the towel, revealing the golden, fragrant muffins. Then she gave her daughter a look that Anabelle knew all too well. The look of a mother about to ask a question her daughter probably didn't want to answer. "Did you sleep well?" "I did." Anabelle. Her tone wasn't accusatory, just knowing. Megan could read her daughter like a favorite book she'd read 1,000 times before. Every pause, every hesitation, every lie. Anabelle sighed, leaning her hip against the counter and crossing her arms. "I stayed up late studying. I've got that accounting exam next week and I hate accounting." "You hate anything that involves numbers." "Exactly. Why on earth does a coffee shop need accounting that complicated? We sell coffee. We're not running a corporate audit." Megan laughed, shaking her head as she started arranging the muffins in the glass display. "Because one day this cafe will be yours, and you need to know how to keep it running. Numbers matter, sweetheart, even when they're boring." Anabelle knew that. Of course she did. But saying it out loud, that she was being groomed to take over the Sunset Beans one day, carried a weight she wasn't sure she was ready to bear. Not because she didn't love the place. She did. But sometimes she wondered if that was, truly what she wanted. If this safe, predictable path that had already been laid out for her was really hers. "Hey," Megan's voice brought her back. Her mother had stopped arranging the muffins and was looking at her with that kind of focused attention that made Anabelle feel completely seen. "Where did you just go?" "Nowhere. Just thinking." "About what?" Anabelle hesitated, then decided to be honest. "Because with Megan, hiding things never worked anyway. Sometimes I wake up and wonder if this is all there is, you know? Not that it's bad, I love this place, I love working here with you and Dad, but I don't know. I'm 23 and it feels like my whole life's already mapped out. Coffee shop in the morning, college in the afternoon, study at night, sleep, wake up, repeat. And I look around and see people my age traveling, meeting new people, doing crazy things, and I'm just stuck." "You're not stuck, Anabelle. You're building. But what if I want to build something else? Or at least be sure this is what I want before I get truly stuck?" Megan didn't answer right away. She just took 2 cups, prepared 2 short coffees, and set one in front of her daughter. Then she sat on the stool across the counter and took a sip, thoughtful. "You know what I think?" she said finally. "I think you're scared." Anabelle frowned. "Scared of what?" "That something big is about to happen, and you're not ready for it." Megan smiled faintly. That soft smile carrying years of wisdom and a few well-healed emotional scars. "I know that feeling. I had it before I met your father. I had it before you were born. I had it every time life was about to turn upside down. It's a strange kind of restlessness, as if your body knows something your mind hasn't caught up with yet." Anabelle took a sip of her coffee, feeling the warm bitterness slide down her throat. "And what am I supposed to do with that?" "You wait. And while you wait, you live. Because life doesn't warn you before it blows up in your face, sweetheart. It just does. And when it does, you'll know exactly what to do." Anabelle wanted to believe that. She wanted to trust that calm certainty her mother always carried. But for now, all she could feel was that sensation of standing on the edge of something undefined, waiting for the push that hadn't come yet. The doorbell chimed and she looked up, silently thanking the universe for the interruption. Liam Thompson burst in like a blonde hurricane, wearing a gray hoodie 3 sizes too big, a backpack hanging off one shoulder, and the kind of messy hair that screamed he'd woken up 10 minutes ago and decided combing was optional. "Good morning, Holland family," he announced dramatically, arms spread as if entering a TV show. "I've come to bless this fine establishment with my radiant presence and contagious good mood." Megan rolled her eyes, but she was smiling. "Good morning, Liam. Here for the free coffee or to annoy my daughter?" "Both, I'm a multitasker." Anabelle was already preparing his usual double Americano. She knew the order by heart. She knew Liam by heart. He'd been part of her life forever, literally. They'd gone to the same school, the same terrible birthday parties, survived high school together, and now navigated the chaos of adulthood with that comfortable kind of friendship where no inside joke needed explaining. They'd, lived them all. "Did you sleep on the street?" Anabelle asked, handing him the cup. "Worse. I fell asleep listening to my mother plan the triumphant return of the prodigal son." Liam took a long sip and moaned dramatically. "God, Ann, your coffee should be illegal. It's that good." "I know. Humility consumes you, I see. Humility is for insecure people." He laughed and settled into his favorite chair, the one by the window where he could watch the street and make sarcastic comments about passers-by. Megan kissed Anabelle on the forehead before heading to the back, leaving the 2 of them alone in the easy rhythm of an old friendship. Anabelle went back to organizing cups behind the counter, but she could feel Liam watching her with that look he got when he was about to drop a bomb. "What?" she asked without looking up. "Nothing. Liam, I just thought you should know that what I said about the triumphant return is actually true. My brother's coming back." Anabelle froze mid-motion, still holding a cup in the air. She slowly turned her head. "Colin, that's the one." She set the cup back on the shelf and turned fully toward him, crossing her arms. "Why is he coming back?" Liam shrugged, scrolling through his phone without really looking at it. "Says he needs a break, to slow down. Apparently LA is eating him alive. Works 16 hours a day, sleeps 4 if he's lucky, living that classic stressed-out executive life. My mom's ecstatic. My dad's cautiously optimistic. And me, I'm just waiting to see the damage." Anabelle frowned. "Damage?" "Colin doesn't rest, Anne. He doesn't know how. By day 3 here, he'll already be losing his mind because he's got nothing to do. He's intense, always has been. Everything about him is intense. Anabelle tried to remember the last time she'd seen Colin Thompson. It had been years, many years. He'd left Santa Barbara when she was still a teenager, chasing some brilliant corporate career in Los Angeles. And since then, he'd become more of a family legend than a real person. The successful older brother, the golden child, the Thompson who had made it, while Liam was still figuring things out. Is he staying long? No idea. I don't think even he knows. Liam finally looked up at her, and there was something in his face she couldn't quite read. Nervousness? Worry? But it's gonna be weird having him home again. I mean, I admire him, you. No, but he just changes the air in a room. It's like everything gets heavier when he's around. Are you afraid of him? I'm not afraid. I don't know. He's always been the perfect son. Graduated with honors, brilliant career, makes a ton of money. And I'm the son who's still trying to figure out what he wants in life. He made air quotes, smirking. Comparisons are inevitable. Anabelle stepped closer and placed a hand on his shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. You don't need to compete with him, Liam. You're amazing in your own way. I know, rationally I know. But when he's around, it's hard not to feel like I should be further ahead, you know. I do. But you're exactly where you need to be. And anyone who doesn't see that is an idiot. Liam smiled, grateful, and took another sip of his coffee. Anyway, I just thought you should know. He's getting here this weekend. He'll probably stop by here at some point. My mom's already planning family dinners and all that. Anabelle nodded, but something strange stirred in her chest. It wasn't nervousness. It wasn't fear. It was curiosity. What was Colin like now? Was he still the arrogant guy Liam used to describe? Or had he changed? And why on earth did she care? She shook her head quickly, forcing the thoughts away. Colin was Liam's brother. That was all. They probably wouldn't even run into each other much. He had his own life in Los Angeles, and soon enough, he'd go right back to it. It made no difference. None at all. The rest of the morning went by quickly. Customers came and went. Mrs. Patterson asking for a latte, no foam but still creamy, which technically made no sense. Mr. Rodriguez complaining that the local newspaper was getting worse by the day, and the young writer who showed up every Tuesday and Thursday to sit in the corner with her laptop, pretending to write the next great American novel while actually scrolling through social media. Anabelle brewed coffees, traded playful banter with familiar faces, listened to confessions, gave unsolicited advice, and laughed more than she probably should have. When business finally started to slow down around noon, she took off her apron and hung it on the hook behind the counter. "I'm going home for lunch. Can you cover for me?" she asked Mary, the afternoon employee who had just arrived. "Of course, sweetheart. Go ahead." Liam was still there, now actually, working on his laptop, earbuds in, completely immersed in whatever project he was tackling. Anabelle tapped lightly on his table until he pulled one earbud out. "I'm heading home for lunch. You coming?" He glanced at the clock on his screen and frowned. "It's already noon? Wow." Then he grinned. "Your mom cooking?" "Probably. Then I'm coming." They left together, walking down the quiet streets of Santa Barbara. The sun was high, the sky perfectly blue without a single cloud, and the air carried the scent of the ocean mixed with flowers and freshly brewed coffee. Anabelle shoved her hands into her jeans pockets, feeling the soft breeze against her skin, and for a moment, let her mind drift. Life was good, simple, predictable, safe, but deep in that restless corner of her chest, a small, stubborn voice whispered that maybe predictability wasn't the same as fulfillment, and somewhere between the café and the Holland house, between the scent of coffee and Liam's easy laughter beside her, Anabelle had no idea her life was about to be turned upside down, because Colin Thompson was coming back, and when he did, nothing would ever be the same again. 3 days had passed since that conversation at the café, and Anabelle had tried, honestly tried, not to think about Colin Thompson. She had failed miserably. It wasn't as if she were obsessed. Far from it. It was more like an annoying curiosity that showed up at the most inconvenient moments. When she was making a cappuccino, and caught herself wondering what it would be like to serve coffee to someone who probably drank espresso in sleek, overpriced offices in Los Angeles. When Liam casually mentioned his brother, and she paid far too much attention, memorizing details she had absolutely no reason to memorize. When her mother asked if everything was okay and she lied, saying yes, because how could she explain that she was oddly nervous about meeting someone she technically already knew from years ago? It was ridiculous, completely ridiculous. And then Saturday arrived. Saturdays at Sunset Beans were always busy. Families came in for brunch, young couples claimed the window tables, and students scattered in corners with laptops and headphones. Anabelle was on autopilot, making drinks, handing out orders, exchanging polite smiles with customers while her mind wandered everywhere else. She was adjusting the cup shelf when she heard Liam's voice, louder than usual, laced with that forced enthusiasm she knew too well. It was the tone he used when he was nervous and trying to hide it. And here it is, the best coffee shop in Santa Barbara, run by the best barista on the West Coast. Anabelle rolled her eyes, turning around with a sarcastic smile already forming on her lips. Liam, I know you're trying to butter me up for free coffee, but the sentence died halfway, because standing beside Liam was a man she recognized instantly, even after all those years, Colin Thompson. And he was absolutely nothing like what she'd been expecting. Tall, much taller than she remembered, or maybe she had just forgotten since the last time she'd seen him she was still growing. He must have been around 6'1", maybe taller, with broad shoulders that filled out a gray button-down shirt rolled neatly to the elbows, revealing tanned, defined forearms that suggested someone who didn't spend all his time behind a desk. Dark jeans, perfectly fitted, not too formal but far from casual. The kind of outfit that said, I don't need to try to impress you because I already know I do. His dark brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd run a hand through it absent-mindedly, and a few silver strands at his temples didn't age him. They just added an irritating layer of sophistication. His jaw was sharp and strong, shadowed by a 2 or 3 day stubble that should have looked careless, but somehow appeared intentional. And then there were the eyes, green, not the soft, gentle kind. A deep, striking green, sharp, intelligent, unsettling. The kind of green that made you forget what you were about to say, and they were fixed on her. It wasn't a casual look. It was assessing, measuring, drawing conclusions before a single word was spoken, like he could read every thought crossing her mind just by looking. Anabelle felt something strange happen in her stomach. Not nervousness, not exactly. It was closer to alert, that instinctive jolt when your whole body recognizes that something important has just entered your space, and you have to decide quickly whether it's a threat or a promise. The silence lasted 3, maybe 4 seconds, long enough for her to realize she was staring and needed to say something before it turned awkward. Anabelle, this is my brother Colin, Liam said, grinning too widely, gesturing between them like an overly eager talk show host. Colin, this is Anabelle, my lifelong best friend and the reason this town still functions, because she keeps everyone caffeinated and at least marginally civilized. Colin stepped forward, the movement fluid and confident, and Anabelle had to consciously remind herself not to back away. He extended his hand. Pleasure to meet you, Anabelle. The voice was deep, not artificially deep, but naturally resonant, carrying that texture that made every word sound deliberate, controlled, as if he chose each syllable with care. Anabelle hesitated for the briefest moment, just long enough for him to notice she was sure of it, before taking his hand. It was large, warm, and his grip was firm without being overbearing, but when their fingers touched, a subtle current ran across her skin, as if the air around them had changed temperature. She withdrew her hand too quickly, folding her arms and searching for something, anything, to do with her hands, which suddenly felt clumsy and untrustworthy. Colin, she said evenly, keeping her tone neutral and professional as if greeting any other customer. Anabelle, he repeated her name slowly, testing the sound of it on his tongue, and something in the way he said it made her skin tingle. Then he smiled. Not a full smile, but the kind that curved just one corner of his mouth, half amusement, half something else she couldn't name. So you're the Anabelle. Liam talks about you all the time. I hope he said good things. He said you're sarcastic, stubborn, and have an opinion about absolutely everything. The silence between them grew so dense she could almost feel its weight pressing down on her shoulders. Liam let out a nervous laugh, running a hand through his hair. I didn't say it exactly like that. No? Colin tilted his head slightly, eyes still locked on her, that half-smile deepening. Because that's exactly what I heard. His words were, and I quote, "Anabelle never lets anything slide. She'll correct you even if you didn't ask. She's irritating and amazing at the same time." Anabelle felt the heat rise to her cheeks, not from embarrassment, from anger, or something dangerously close to it. Who did this man think he was, walking in here with that effortless superiority and throwing in her face what his brother had said in confidence? She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze head-on. "Well, Liam didn't lie. I am sarcastic, stubborn, and I have an opinion about everything." She paused, deliberately. "And one of my strongest opinions is that arrogant people usually compensate for a lack of substance with an excess of confidence." Colin's smile widened, not in the way she expected. He didn't look offended. He didn't even look surprised. On the contrary, he seemed genuinely entertained, as if she had said exactly what he'd been waiting to hear. "Interesting," he said, his voice low but tinged with something dangerous. "And what's your opinion about coffee? That it's better than most people, including me? Especially you." Liam let out a loud, nervous laugh, glancing between them like a spectator at a particularly intense tennis match. Okay, easy there, you two. Anne, do me a favor and make Colin your special. He needs caffeine after driving all the way from LA. 6 hours in the car because he refused my brilliant suggestion to take a flight. Driving calms me," Colin said, but his eyes were still on Anabelle, as if he were trying to decipher a particularly fascinating riddle. "Sure," Anabelle murmured, turning her back to them and moving toward the espresso machine. She could feel his gaze on her, heavy, insistent, as if he were studying every move, every breath, every thought. And for some completely irrational reason, it infuriated her. She made the coffee, tapping the cup against the counter, pulling the lever with a sharp motion that made the machine hiss in protest. When she was done, she set the double espresso in front of him. No flourish, no smile, none of the automatic warmth she usually offered customers. Double espresso, no sugar, no milk, no nonsense. Colin took the cup, and Anabelle noticed, because apparently now she was noticing everything about him, that his hands were large, his fingers long, marked with faint scars that didn't belong to a man who spent all his time in polished offices. He brought the cup to his lips and took a slow, deliberate sip, keeping his eyes on her the entire time. Anabelle folded her arms, waiting. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of asking if he liked it. He could form his own judgment and keep it to himself. He lowered the cup, ran his tongue lightly over his lower lip, a distracted, unnecessary gesture she definitely shouldn't have noticed, and nodded. "Good," he said simply. "Actually, very good. I know. Humility doesn't seem to be your strength either. No, just like charm doesn't seem to be yours." Liam closed his eyes and rubbed his temples like someone developing an instant headache. "Dear God, you two are going to kill me. Literally kill me." Colin chuckled softly, the sound low and resonant from his chest in a way that Anabelle felt vibrate through her own bones. She hated that, hated how at ease he seemed, so relaxed, so in control, while she stood there wound tight like a violin string, her heart beating faster than it had any right to. "Relax, little brother," Colin said, patting Liam's shoulder. "Your friend and I are just getting acquainted." "Yeah, acquainted," Anabelle muttered, turning to reorganize cups that were already perfectly aligned. Colin stayed a few more minutes, asking casual questions about the town. What had changed over the years, who was still around, which faces were gone. Liam answered cheerfully, clearly thrilled to have his brother back, while Anabelle pretended not to listen. But she was. She heard every word, noticed the way. Colin spoke, slowly, deliberately, as if every sentence were a calculated move. His voice carried a hint of that Los Angeles polish, but underneath it was still Santa Barbara, the softer vowels, the lazy cadence on certain words. And then, when she least expected it, he turned to her again. "Liam says you practically grew up here, in this cafe." Anabelle looked up, meeting his gaze. That impossible green, sharp and consuming. "I did. My parents own the place. I've worked here since I was old enough to hold a cup without spilling it." "And do you like it?" The question was simple. The tone wasn't. There was something else there. A genuine curiosity that caught her off guard, as if he truly wanted to know, as if the answer mattered. "I do," she said. "It's not glamorous, it's not Los Angeles, but it's real, and I'll take real over anything else." Something flickered in his expression, just for a second, as though she'd said something he hadn't expected. "Real is rare," he said at last, his voice softer now. "It is, especially in people who live off appearances." That half-smile returned, that infuriating, knowing smirk that was starting to do strange things to her stomach. "You're very direct, aren't you?" "I am. Problem with that?" "None." He finished his coffee and set the cup carefully back on the counter. "Actually, I find it refreshing. Most people in Los Angeles have spent so much time polishing their masks, they've forgotten what's underneath. It's exhausting." Anabelle didn't reply. She just held his gaze for another moment, long enough to feel that electric current again, that mutual awareness that something was happening there, something neither of them was ready to name. Then she turned away, took his cup and placed it in the sink. Colin said goodbye to Liam, gave her a brief wave, a casual gesture that somehow felt deliberate, and left. The doorbell chimed, and silence fell again, but it was a different kind of silence, heavy, as if something had been left in the air, unnamed, shapeless, but impossible to ignore. Liam leaned against the counter, elbows propped up, watching her with an expression caught somewhere between amusement and genuine concern. "So, what did you think?" Anabelle snorted, scrubbing the cup Colin had used harder than necessary, as if she could scrub away the memory of that green stare. "I thought exactly what I expected. Arrogant, conceited, full of himself. I thought you two were going to get along great." She stopped, staring at him in absolute disbelief. "Are you out of your mind? No, you're alike. We are nothing alike, not even remotely. Yes, you are. Stubborn, outspoken, allergic to being contradicted, always convinced you're right." Liam grinned mischievously. "It's going to be fun watching you two share the same space." Anabelle rolled her eyes and went back to work, but something inside her, something small, persistent, and deeply irritating, knew that Liam was right. Colin Thompson had stepped into her life like a quiet storm. No warning, no permission, and as much as she tried to deny it, something had shifted the moment their eyes met. Something inevitable, something dangerous, something she was absolutely, definitely not even remotely ready to deal with. But the universe, as always, couldn't care less about what Anabelle Holland was or wasn't ready to face. The following week was strange in a way Anabelle couldn't quite name, not because anything dramatic had happened. On the contrary, everything stayed exactly the same. The cafe opened at the same hour. The same customers ordered the same drinks with the same complaints. Liam showed up every morning with his usual chaotic energy, and Megan stopped by with pastries and unsolicited advice that no one asked for, but everyone needed. Everything was the same. Exactly the same. Except it wasn't. Anabelle felt the difference in the tiniest, almost invisible details, in how she became oddly alert every time the doorbell rang, in how her thoughts drifted to inconvenient places at the most inconvenient times, in that unsettling sense that something in the world's axis had shifted slightly, but she couldn't tell what or why, and worst of all, she knew exactly why. Colin. He hadn't come back to the cafe since that first encounter, but his presence lingered in the air like stubborn smoke that refused to fade. Liam. Mentioned him often. Casual remarks about how their mother was spoiling the prodigal son. Childhood stories Anabelle had heard 1,000 times, but which now carried new meaning because she could picture the grown man inside them. Complaints about how Colin was already restless after only 5 days without work. Anabelle pretended not to care. She tossed off casual comments, changed the subject whenever she could, but she listened to every word as if filing information away for a test. She hadn't realized she'd have to take. She hated it. Hated that he'd claimed space in her mind without permission. Hated that whenever she closed her eyes at night, she saw that damned half-smile, those green eyes that seemed to cut through any defense she tried to build. Hated that. For the first time in a long while, she was curious, genuinely, dangerously curious, about someone who was clearly the kind of trouble she didn't need. And then, on a Thursday afternoon, as the sun began, To lean toward the horizon, everything shifted again. Anabelle was wiping down the corner tables, collecting abandoned cups and muffin crumbs, when she heard familiar voices at the entrance. She looked up, and her stomach gave that irritating little jump. Liam was walking in, followed by Emma and Jason, his parents. And right behind them, as inevitable as gravity, came Colin. Her heart sped up before her brain had time to issue a more reasonable reaction. She straightened too quickly, nearly dropping the tray she was holding, and forced a smile as she greeted them. Emma was the first to reach her, opening her arms with the same genuine warmth she'd shown ever since Liam and Anabelle had become inseparable as teenagers. "Sweetheart, it's been so long, you look beautiful." Anabelle returned the hug, inhaling the familiar floral scent Emma always wore, the kind of perfume that carried memories of family dinners and summer afternoons at the Thompsons' house. "Hi. Emma, you look wonderful too. How have you been?" "Good, good. Now that I have both my boys at home, I'm over the moon." Emma stepped back but kept holding Anabelle's hands affectionately. "We need to plan a dinner soon. It's been ages since we really caught up." "I'd love that." Jason gave her a polite wave, smiling in his calm, steady way, and walked straight to the counter to study the handwritten chalkboard menu. Colin lingered near the door for a moment, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark jeans, wearing a simple white t-shirt that was supposed to look casual, but somehow looked intentional on him, and that neutral expression she was starting to recognize as his default way of assessing a room. Then his eyes found hers, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe interest, definitely that restrained amusement that made her want to move closer and run away at the same time. "We came for coffee, and to catch up," Emma said, still holding Anabelle's hands. "And because I wanted to see you. Liam talks about you so much that I sometimes forget you don't actually live with us." Anabelle laughed, this time genuinely, feeling the warmth of that family that had always treated her as one of their own. "I've missed you too, Emma. The usual, that cinnamon cappuccino?" "Please, dear, you remembered." "Of course I did." She turned toward the counter to prepare their drinks, but she could physically feel, the weight of Colin's gaze even without looking at him directly. It was as if his presence changed the density of the air around her, making everything heavier, charged, impossible to ignore. Megan appeared from the back just then, drying her hands on a kitchen towel, her face lighting up instantly at the sight of the Thompsons. "Emma, Jason, what a wonderful surprise." The two women embraced with the easy warmth of long friendship, years of laughter, confidences and stories about their children, woven between them. Jason greeted Megan with a polite nod, and that calm smile of a man who spoke little but saw everything. Then Megan's eyes landed on Colin, and there was genuine surprise there. "Colin, my goodness, you've grown so much I almost didn't recognize you." Colin smiled, and Anabelle noticed, because apparently she noticed everything about him now, that it was a different smile than the one he'd given her. Softer, polite, stripped of that sharp, knowing edge. "Hi, Megan. It's been a long time." "Far too long." Megan stepped forward and gave him a quick hug, patting his back the same way she did with Liam. "Welcome home, dear." "Thank you. It's good to be back." Megan stepped away, and for just a moment, barely 2 seconds, but Anabelle registered it with crystal clarity. Her mother's eyes flicked from Colin to her, then back to Colin again, and there it was, that unmistakable glint that said, "I saw something here and I'll be asking questions later." Anabelle felt her face heat up and quickly turned her attention back to the espresso machine, as if making coffee were the most fascinating thing in the world. "Anne, sweetheart, come sit with them," Megan said. "I'll take care of the counter for now." "Mom, I'm working, and I'm your boss. Sit." There was no room for debate. Anabelle sighed, finished preparing the drinks, handed the tray to Liam, and reluctantly followed the group to the large table by the window. Emma and Jason sat on one side, Liam took the other, and Colin remained standing until she approached, waiting to see where she would sit before choosing his own seat. Old-fashioned and completely unnecessary chivalry. Anabelle sat next to Liam, putting as much distance between herself and Colin as the small table allowed. Naturally, he sat directly across from her, because the universe, apparently, had a cruel sense of humor. Emma began chatting cheerfully about Colin's plans, about how happy she was to have her son home, even if only temporarily, about all the things that had changed in Santa Barbara yet somehow stayed the same. Jason listened quietly, adding a thoughtful comment every now and then, calm as always. Liam rolled his eyes a few times but was clearly happy, relaxed in that rare way he only was when the family was complete. And Anabelle tried to focus on the conversation, tried to join in, but she was painfully aware of Colin sitting less than a meter away, of how his forearms rested on the table, of the way his large hands held the coffee cup, of how he sometimes tilted his head slightly when someone spoke, as if absorbing every word with meticulous attention. "And you, dear? How are things?" Emma asked suddenly, turning her full attention to Anabelle. "Liam told me you're practically running the cafe all by yourself now." Anabelle shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Not exactly by myself. My parents still run everything. I just help where I can." "She's far too modest," Liam said, leaning forward. "This place wouldn't function without her, like literally wouldn't. She knows everyone, remembers every order, fixes every problem." "That's not true." "It's completely true." Emma smiled, looking between them with that unmistakably maternal fondness. "You two have always been like this, ever since you were kids. Always close, always defending each other. I remember when you were 12. You were already inseparable." "That's because he used to follow me everywhere," Anabelle teased, nudging Liam's shoulder. "I didn't follow you, you dragged me into your crazy ideas. You loved my crazy ideas. I didn't have a choice." They laughed, and even Jason smiled in that calm, understated way of his. But Colin said nothing. He just watched, eyes fixed on Anabelle with that unnerving intensity that made her feel as if she were being studied, catalogued, understood in layers she hadn't even known existed. She could feel the weight of that stare, physical, tangible, as if his eyes had texture. "And you, Colin?" Jason asked, turning to his eldest. "Have you thought about what you'll do while you're here?" Colin finally looked away from her, and Anabelle could breathe again. "Not yet. For now, I just want to exist. No schedule, no pressure. LA is..." He paused, searching for the right word. "Intense, exhausting. I need time away from it before I decide whether to go back or change direction entirely." "Change direction?" Emma asked, her voice carrying barely hidden hope. "Are you thinking about staying?" "I don't know, Mom. I'm still processing. But the idea of returning to that pace..." He shook his head. "I'm not sure I want that again." "Well, you have all the time in the world to decide," Jason said firmly but kindly. "Whatever you choose, we'll support it." Colin nodded, grateful, but there was something in his face, a subtle tightness in his jaw, a shadow behind his eyes, as if he were carrying a weight no one else could see. Anabelle found herself wanting to ask, wanting to understand what exactly had brought him back, but she swallowed the words because it wasn't her business, and because opening that door would mean admitting that she cared about the answer. The conversation flowed on. Old stories, inside jokes, plans for a family dinner next week. And then, beneath the table, Colin's knee brushed lightly against hers. It was a brief touch, probably accidental. He was just shifting in his chair, but he didn't move his leg away, and neither did she. They stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds, knees touching through denim. A faint pressure that shouldn't have meant anything, but that sent electric shocks up their legs and straight to their stomachs. Anabelle lifted her coffee cup and took a sip, doing her best to look entirely indifferent to the fact that an invisible current of tension was now sparking. From that tiny point of contact, "You all right?" Colin asked quietly, leaning slightly toward her, his voice close enough that she could feel the air move. "Perfectly fine," she replied without looking at him. "You sure? You seem distracted." She finally turned her head, and he was dangerously close, that infuriating half-smile tugging at his lips like he knew exactly what he was doing. "I'm not distracted. I'm just thinking." "About what?" "About things that are definitely none of your business." He tilted his head, amusement glinting in his eyes. "You know that only makes me more curious, right? Your problem, not mine." He laughed softly, the sound low and warm, resonating from his chest in a way that Anabelle felt deep in her bones. "You're something else, you know that? I hear that a lot. It's rarely a compliment. It should be." And before she could process that, or come up with a properly sarcastic reply, Emma stood up, announcing that it was time to go. and the moment shattered like glass. The family said their goodbyes with hugs and promises to meet again soon. Colin was the last to leave, pausing by the door for half a second to look at her one more time. Just look, nothing else. And then he was gone. Liam lingered behind, sliding onto a stool at the counter while Anabelle went back to work. He watched her in silence for a few minutes before speaking, his voice carrying that tone only a lifelong friend could have. One that knew every detail, every secret, every lie. "So, you and Colin, huh?" Anabelle nearly dropped the cup she was washing. What? What are you talking about?" "Nothing. Just interesting dynamic between you two." "There's no dynamic. Anne, I know you. I know when you're lying. I'm not lying. You are, and you're blushing." She instinctively brought her hand to her face, feeling the warmth that was absolutely there. Liam chuckled under his breath, but it wasn't teasing, it was concern. "Look, I'll just say this." He leaned forward, his tone growing serious. "Colin's complicated. He seems confident, in control, but deep down he's always fighting something. I don't know what. He never talks about it, but I can feel it. I know it's there." Anabelle stopped washing the cup and turned to face him. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you're my best friend, and he's my brother." Liam held her gaze, uncharacteristically serious. "And I don't know what's going to happen between you two, but I know something will, so just be careful, okay? Both of you, be careful." She didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. She just nodded, and Liam smiled faintly, relieved, before heading out. Left alone behind the counter, Anabelle braced her hands on the cool wood and let out a long breath that seemed to come from somewhere far too deep inside. Colin was turning everything upside down, and she wasn't even sure when or how it had started. She only knew it had, and that it was far too late to pretend otherwise. That night, while helping Megan close up the cafe, Anabelle finally asked the question that had been lodged in her chest all day. "Mom, how did you know Dad was the one?" Megan stopped wiping the counter and looked at her, surprised. Then she smiled, that soft, wise smile, full of good memories and a few well-healed scars. "I didn't. Not at first." She leaned on the counter, thoughtful. "Your father drove me. Absolutely crazy when we met." Anabelle blinked, genuinely taken aback. "Seriously?" "Dead serious. He was arrogant, talked too much, thought he knew everything about everything. I couldn't stand being in the same room with him." "So what changed?" Megan tilted her head, her eyes going distant for a moment, as if she were reliving something precious. "I stopped resisting. I stopped trying to make him fit the idea of what I thought the right man should be, and I started seeing him for who he truly was." She focused back on her daughter. "And when I did that, when I finally let my defenses down, I realized he was exactly what I needed. Not what I thought I wanted, what I needed." Anabelle fell silent, absorbing those words like someone drinking water after days in the desert. Megan stepped closer, gently cupping her daughter's face in her hand. "Why are you asking me that, Anne?" "Just curious." Megan smiled, but didn't press further. She knew when to let things breathe. "When it's the right one, you'll know. Maybe not right away, maybe it'll take time, but eventually you'll know. And when you do, it'll be impossible to ignore." Anabelle nodded, but inside, her heart was beating unevenly, because for the first time she was beginning to suspect, just suspect, not yet admit, that maybe she already knew, and that terrified her more than anything else. 2 weeks had passed since that encounter at the cafe, and Colin hadn't shown up again. Anabelle told herself she was relieved, that it was easier this way, that his absence brought back the comfortable normalcy she valued so much. But the truth, the annoying, undeniable truth she kept trying to shove into the darkest corner of her mind, was that she had glanced at the door every single time the bell rang. She had listened far too closely whenever Liam mentioned his brother. She had caught herself thinking about those green eyes at completely inappropriate moments. It was, ridiculous, pathetic, and completely out of her control. So when Liam showed up on a Tuesday afternoon with that expression that always meant "I'm about to ask you for a huge favor," Anabelle already knew trouble was coming. "I need a favor," he said, dropping dramatically onto the counter stool with a sigh. "No, you don't even know what I'm going to ask. I've known you long enough to know that when you start with, 'I need a favor,' and that face, the answer is no. Liam gave her, that abandoned puppy look he had perfected at age 6. It's for the good of the family, for domestic harmony, for the balance of the universe. Dramatics won't work either. My mom's having dinner. Tonight. She wants you to come. Anabelle stopped cleaning the espresso machine and looked at him suspiciously. Why does your mom want me at a family dinner on a Tuesday night? Because she adores you, misses you, and thinks you don't come by the house often enough since Colin came back. His name hung in the air like a bomb. Oh, Anabelle went back to wiping the machine. So Colin will be there. Well, yes, he lives there. Kind of inevitable. Then the answer is no. Anne, please. My mom will be disappointed. She's literally asked about you 3 times this week, and I might have promised you'd come. You promised without asking me? Because I knew you'd make an excuse. It's not an excuse. I actually have things to do. What things? Studying? You study every day. One evening won't kill you. Anabelle opened her mouth to protest, but Megan appeared at that exact moment carrying a tray of brownies fresh from the oven. She's going, Megan announced, setting the tray on the counter. Mom. What? Emma called to invite you. It would be rude to refuse. Besides, you need to get out of this cafe once in a while. See people. Socialize. I socialize all day here. Serving customers doesn't count as real socializing. Megan looked at Liam. What time's dinner? 7 o'clock. Perfect. Anabelle finishes here at 6. Plenty of time to go home, get ready, and be there right on time. Megan smiled at her daughter with that unmistakable mother's already decided expression. Done. Settled. Anabelle looked from Megan to Liam and back again, realizing she had been completely ambushed. I hate you both. No, you don't, Liam said with a triumphant grin. You love us. Admit it. She rolled her eyes, but was fighting a smile. I hate you a little less than her, she said to Megan. I'll take that as a win, Megan replied, already heading back to the kitchen. And that was how Anabelle found herself 6 hours later, standing in front of her bedroom mirror, trying to decide whether she was overdressing or underdressing for what was supposed to be just a simple family dinner. She had changed clothes 3 times. 3. Like a teenager getting ready for her first date. It was humiliating. She finally settled on a simple summer dress that hit just above the knees, feminine but not showy. She left her hair down in soft waves, wore light makeup, and added just a hint of perfume. Casual, unassuming, as if she hadn't put much thought into it. A blatant lie, but at least a convincing one. Liam picked her up at 7, honking impatiently from the car in true Liam fashion. You look beautiful, he said when she climbed in. Thanks. You look like yourself. He laughed. Always so generous with your compliments. The drive to the Thompsons' house took less than 10 minutes, but every minute stretched endlessly as Anabelle tried to calm the foolish nerves that had taken over her stomach. It was just dinner, with a family she'd known for years. There was absolutely no reason to be nervous, except there was, and that reason was 6'1", with green eyes and a talent for completely wrecking her balance simply by existing in the same room. The Thompsons' house was as warm and welcoming as always. Soft lighting, the smell of homemade food drifting from the kitchen, the sound of laughter and conversation spilling from the living room. Emma opened the door before they even rang the bell, her face lighting up instantly. Anabelle, darling, I'm so happy you came. She pulled her into a tight hug. I've missed you so much. I missed you too, Emma. Liar. You were avoiding us because my eldest son is intimidating. Emma whispered it with a conspiratorial smile, and Anabelle felt her cheeks heat up. I wasn't avoiding. Of course not. Emma winked. Now come in. Dinner's almost ready. The living room was casually but carefully arranged. Jason sat in his armchair reading the newspaper and waved warmly when he saw her. And there, near the window, scrolling through his phone, was Colin. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered across his face. Genuine surprise. Then that half-smile she was starting to know all too well. Well, the Queen of Coffee has graced our humble home with her presence. I was forced to come. Don't feel special. Anabelle shot back automatically, because sarcasm was the only defense she had against the way her heart had just sped up. Oh, but I do feel special. The fact that you had to be forced makes it far more interesting. Have you two started already? Liam protested. We haven't even made it through the door. Emma reappeared. carrying a tray of appetizers. Let them be, Liam. It's entertaining watching two smart people try to outwit each other. She winked at Anabelle. But go easy on him, dear. He's still a bit sensitive after being exiled from corporate paradise. Mom, I wasn't exiled. I left by choice. Of course, dear, by choice. After working yourself into a mild panic attack at the office. An awkward silence fell over the room. Colin closed his eyes for a second, his jaw tightening. Mom, we've talked about sharing my personal life without permission. Emma looked genuinely regretful. I'm sorry, son, She sighed. I'm sorry. Jason stood, placing a hand on Colin's shoulder. Come help me in the garage. The ladies can chat here. It was clearly an excuse to give him some space, and Colin accepted with a silent nod, following his father out of the room. Liam hesitated, glancing at Anabelle as if deciding whether to stay, but she gestured for him to go and he obeyed reluctantly. Anabelle stood in the middle of the living room, processing what she had just heard. Panic attack. Colin had had a panic attack. The man who seemed unshakable, always in control, always confident. And suddenly, he was human, vulnerable, carrying an invisible weight of his own. She didn't know what to do with that information. She didn't know whether to pretend she hadn't heard, or whether she should. What? Offer support? Ask questions? Ignore it completely? 10 minutes later, when Emma called everyone to the dinner table, Colin returned with a carefully neutral expression. He sat across from Anabelle again, because apparently that was his assigned seat by the universe, and for the first few minutes of dinner, he remained silent while the others chatted. Anabelle watched him from the corner of her eye. The way he cut his food, the way he answered questions with polite but distant monosyllables, the faint tension in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. And then, without thinking too much, she did something stupid. Under the table, she stretched out her leg and nudged his foot lightly. Colin looked up, surprised. She simply raised one eyebrow as if to say, "You okay?" He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he gave the slightest nod, almost imperceptible, and something in her chest tightened in a way she wasn't prepared to feel. Dinner went on with conversations about the town, about changes, about future plans. Emma was excitedly planning a birthday party for Jason the following week, and insisted that Anabelle help with the preparations. "Of course I'll help," Anabelle agreed. "Wonderful. Colin's helping too. You two can plan together." Anabelle nearly choked on her chicken. "I don't think—" "Great idea, Mom," Colin said, that glint of amusement returning to his eyes. "I'm sure Anabelle and I will work very well together." "I'm sure we'll kill each other," Anabelle muttered. "That, too," he agreed with a grin. After dinner, while Emma served dessert and coffee, Jason pulled Colin aside to show him something in the study, and Liam went to help his mother in the kitchen, leaving Anabelle alone on the back porch. The night was cool, the sky filled with stars you could only see far from city lights. She leaned on the railing, taking a deep breath, trying to process the emotional roller coaster the evening had been. "Running away again?" Colin's voice came from behind, her low and smooth, and Anabelle didn't turn around. "I'm not running, just needed some air." "Of course." He stepped closer, standing beside her, both of them looking out over the dark garden. "Thank you. For earlier." "For what?" "For not acting differently after what my mom said." Anabelle finally looked at him. His face was lit only by the soft light from inside, and there was something gentler there now, less guarded. "I have no reason to act differently. Everyone's got their battles, doesn't make me think any less of you. Most people would. Then most people are idiots." He let out a low laugh, shaking his head. "You are unexpected. I hear that a lot. It's not a complaint." He turned fully toward her now. "It's an observation. You're not like the other people I know. Is that good or bad? I haven't decided yet." He smiled faintly. "But I'm leaning toward good." Her heartbeat quickened, and suddenly the space between them felt far too small, far too charged. "Colin, I know," he said softly. "I know this is complicated. I know you're my brother's best friend. I know there's a 10-year difference between us. I know every reason why this shouldn't be happening. Then why does it feel like it's happening anyway?" The question slipped out before she could stop it, vulnerable and honest in a way that made her want to shrink. Colin studied her for a long moment, then slowly lifted his hand, giving her every chance to step back. She didn't. He touched her face gently, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that completely contrasted with the intensity in his eyes. "Because some things are inevitable," he murmured. "No matter how much we try to fight it, avoid it, keep our distance." And then, before either of them could do something completely reckless, Liam's voice came from the doorway. "Hey, you two! My mom wants to take pictures." Colin stepped back so fast that Anabelle almost lost her balance. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling a frustrated breath, then forced a casual smile. "Let's go before she comes drag us herself." Anabelle nodded, not trusting her own voice. They went back inside, and the rest of the night passed in a blur of photos, laughter, and that unresolved tension hanging between them like smoke. When Liam finally drove her home, Anabelle stayed quiet the entire ride, staring out the window, trying to make sense of what on earth was happening. "You okay?" Liam asked when they pulled up in front of her house. "I'm fine, just tired." He studied her for a moment. "If you ever need to talk about anything, you know you can, right?" "I know." She forced a small smile. "Thanks for dinner." "Anytime." She stepped out of the car and went inside, and only when she closed her bedroom door and sat on the edge of the bed did she finally let everything fall apart. This couldn't be happening. It shouldn't be happening, but it was. And for the first time, Anabelle had absolutely no idea what to do about it. Colin couldn't sleep. It was 3 in the morning and he was lying in bed, in the same room his parents had kept exactly as he'd left it, as if they'd been waiting for him to return any day now, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out when exactly his life had gone completely off the rails. No, that was a lie. He knew exactly when. The moment Anabelle had turned her head in that café and looked at him with those eyes full of defiance, sarcasm, and something deeper he couldn't name, but recognized instinctively. He had spent the last 10 years building a relentless career in Los Angeles, working 16-hour days, closing deals that men twice his age couldn't, climbing the corporate ladder with that cold determination people mistook for ambition, when in reality it was just escape. Escape from feeling, escape from connection, escape from anything that might expose the parts of him that weren't invincible. And then, on an ordinary day, he'd driven back to Santa Barbara because his body had started to collapse under the weight of everything he refused to process. The panic attack in his office had been the breaking point, that suffocating feeling that the walls were closing in, the air was thinning. His heart was beating so fast he was certain he would die right there, surrounded by paperwork and hollow ambition. He had gotten in his car and driven 6 hours in silence, because staying in Los Angeles one more day would have meant admitting that maybe his glittering successful life was nothing but a mask covering a void he didn't know how to fill. And then he'd found her, Anabelle, his brother's best friend, the girl he vaguely remembered from years ago, always attached to Liam, always laughing too loudly, always full of opinions. Except she wasn't a girl anymore. She was a woman who looked at him as if she could see through every layer of armor he had built so carefully. A woman who wasn't impressed by performative confidence because she recognized it for what it was, armor. And worse, so much worse, she was a woman who made him want to take that armor off, who made him want to be seen, truly seen. That was terrifying. Colin got out of bed, unable to stay still, and walked to the window. The street outside was empty, silent, bathed in the amber glow of streetlights. Santa Barbara was asleep, while he was far too awake, thinking too much, feeling too much. The way she had looked at him earlier on that porch, the question she had asked, "Why does it feel like it's happening anyway?" echoed in his head like an unresolved chord, because he didn't have an answer. Or rather, he did, but it was too frightening to say out loud. It was happening because every time she was in the same room, the air shifted, charged, because every time she threw a sharp remark his way, something in his chest warmed, because when she had nudged his foot under the table, that small, genuine gesture of concern, he had felt something inside him begin to crack. The walls he'd spent years building were starting to crumble, and Anabelle wasn't even trying to tear them down. She simply existed, and that was enough. Colin ran a hand over his face, exhausted but unable to shut his mind off. 10 years apart. She was his brother's best friend. She was young, just beginning her adult life, still figuring out who she was. He was 33, a man trying desperately not to fall apart. Every reason why this couldn't happen was rational, logical, undeniable. And yet when he had touched her face earlier, when his fingers had traced that soft line of her jaw, and she hadn't pulled away, something in him had stilled for the first time in months. As if, after so long in free fall, he had finally found solid ground. He wanted to know her. He wanted to understand what lay behind those eyes that saw too much. He wanted to find out what made her laugh for real, not those polite smiles she gave customers. He wanted to know her dreams, her fears, the hidden scars everyone carried but rarely showed. He wanted her. And that, more than anything, was the most dangerous truth of all. Across town, Anabelle couldn't sleep either. She was curled under her blanket, phone in hand, scrolling mindlessly through her screen while her mind replayed that moment on the porch in an endless loop. Some things are inevitable. His voice echoed in her head, low, rough, and filled with an honesty that had cut through every one of her defenses like paper. Anabelle tossed her phone onto the nightstand and rolled onto her side, hugging the pillow as if it could somehow organize the chaos that had taken root in her chest. She wasn't naive. She knew what was happening. Attraction wasn't new to her. She'd had crushes before, been flirted with, even gone on a few. Disastrous dates that ended with her realizing she'd rather be home reading than pretending to enjoy empty conversation. But this was different. Colin wasn't something fleeting. He wasn't just physical attraction, though God knew there was enough of that to set entire cities on fire. It was deeper, more unsettling. It was the way he looked at her, not just at her, but into her, as if he could see all the layers she hid from the world. It was how he didn't try to impress her with achievements or rehearsed charm, but simply existed, vulnerable in a way men that confident rarely allowed themselves to be. It was the fact that when he'd silently admitted, through that awkward dinner moment, that he'd had a panic attack, Anabelle hadn't felt pity. She'd felt recognition, because she too knew what it was like to carry invisible weight, to wake up at 3 a.m. wondering if she was making the right choices, or simply following a script someone else had written for her. She was 23 and already tired of pretending she had it all together, and Colin, with all his 10 extra years and the kind of experience that came with being broken and rebuilt more than once, somehow made her feel less alone in that. But that didn't change the fact that it was complicated. Terribly, impossibly, absurdly complicated. He was Liam's brother, the brother of her lifelong best friend, the person who had seen her grow up, who had been there through every important moment, who knew every secret, every flaw, every version of her, from the best to the worst. How on earth would she ever explain that to Liam? So, about your brother. I'm kind of completely obsessed with him and have no idea what to do about it. Anabelle groaned softly, burying her face in the pillow. And then there was the family. Emma and Jason, who treated her like a daughter, who had expectations, pictures in their minds of how things were supposed to be. Megan, who already had that knowing sparkle in her mother's eyes and would definitely start asking questions soon. And then there was herself, her own fears, her inexperience, which suddenly felt enormous next to a man who had lived a whole lifetime she could barely imagine. What did she have to offer someone like Colin, a 23-year-old girl who made coffee and was still trying to figure out whether she really wanted to spend the rest of her life running a café in Santa Barbara? But then, she remembered the way he had touched her face, so slowly, so carefully, as if she were something precious he was afraid to break. She remembered the look in his eyes when she'd asked that stupid, vulnerable question, "Why does it feel like it's happening anyway?" And the way his breath had gone uneven when she hadn't pulled away. And she knew, even if she wanted to deny it, even if it was safer to pretend otherwise, that it wasn't just her feeling it. He was feeling it too. He was, fighting it, trying to be rational. But he was losing the battle, just like she was. Anabelle grabbed her phone again and, before she could talk herself out of it, opened her chat with Liam. She typed quickly, "Are you awake?" The reply came almost instantly. "Unfortunately, yes, stupid insomnia." "Why are you awake?" she typed back. "Same. Liar. You never have insomnia." "What's going on?" Liam wrote. Anabelle hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. "Just thinking." "About what?" "Things. Anne, I know you. You don't lose sleep over things. Talk to me." Anabelle took a deep breath and typed, "If I ask you something, Do you promise not to freak out? That's never a good sign, but okay, I promise. What would you think if I got close to someone in your family? There was a long pause. A very long pause. Anabelle stared at the screen, heart racing, until finally his reply appeared. By someone in my family, you mean my brother, right? I didn't say that. She typed. Quickly. You didn't have to. I have eyes and I'm not an idiot. You two look at each other like you're in a romance movie. We do not look at each other like that. Anne, you literally do. It's painful to watch. My mom's noticed. My dad's probably noticed. Even the neighbor's dog has probably noticed. Anabelle sighed and typed, This is a disaster. It's not a disaster. It's just complicated, but also kind of obvious. Like you two have that annoying chemistry of smart people who love arguing but are secretly fascinated by each other. I'm not fascinated, she protested. Yes, you are. I'm not. Anne, you just texted me at 3 in the morning to ask about my brother. You're completely fascinated. She didn't reply, because he was right. Look, Liam continued, I'm not going to lie and say it's not weird. It is. You're basically my sister. Colin's my brother. You two together is like, I don't know, crossing parallel universes or something. But, and this is important, you're both adults. And if there's something real there, who am I to say anything? Seriously, she typed, hardly believing it. Seriously. Just don't be all over each other in front of me because that'll be gross and I'll complain a lot. But aside from that, if you make each other happy, fine. I approve. Reluctantly, but I approve. Anabelle felt something loosen in her chest. Thank you. Just be careful, okay? Both of you. You're important to me. I don't want anyone getting hurt. I'll be careful, I promise. Good. Now go to sleep and stop thinking about my brother at 3 a.m. because that's weird. You asked. Details. Good night, Anne. Good night, Liam. She set her phone aside and finally felt her body relax a little. Liam knew. He wasn't angry. He had even approved in his own way. It didn't solve everything. There were still 1,000 other complications, but at least one of them was off her shoulders. Anabelle finally closed her eyes, and this time, sleep came. Next morning, she was making the first coffee of the day when the doorbell rang earlier than usual. She looked up, and her heart skipped a beat. Colin was standing at the door, hands in the pockets of his dark jeans, wearing a simple gray t-shirt, his hair still damp from the shower, and there was something different about his face. Less guarded, more open. Good morning, he said. Good morning, she replied, trying to sound casual. You do realize we don't open for another half hour, right? I know. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. I came early on purpose. Why? He moved closer to the counter, placing his hands on the wooden surface and looked straight into her eyes. Because I couldn't sleep all night thinking about what I almost did yesterday, and I realized I'm tired of almost doing things. He paused. So I came here to actually do it. Anabelle's breath caught. Do what? To ask you out, for real. Just us. No family, no coincidences. A real date. The silence that followed was thick with everything neither of them was saying. Colin, I know all the reasons why you should say no, he said, his voice steady but carrying something fragile underneath. I know it's complicated. I know about the 10-year gap. I know I'm your best friend's brother. I know you probably think I'm still too much of a mess to be doing this, and maybe you're right. But I can't stop thinking about you, and I've tried. Believe me, I've tried, but it's not working. Anabelle held his gaze, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he could hear it. A date, she repeated. A date, he confirmed. Dinner, conversation, no pressure, just getting to know each other. For real this time, not through banter or accidents, genuinely. She should say no. She should be sensible, rational, protect the heart that was already dangerously exposed. But when she opened her mouth, what came out was, all right. Colin blinked, clearly surprised. All right, she repeated, a small smile tugging at her lips. A date. You pick the place. He smiled then, a full, genuine smile that completely transformed his face. Deal. And no expensive, pretentious places like the ones in Los Angeles. This is Santa Barbara. We keep things simple here. I wouldn't expect anything less from you. They stood there for another moment, just looking at each other. And for the first time, Anabelle felt that. Maybe Just maybe this wasn't a complete disaster. Maybe it was something good, something real, something worth the risk. Tomorrow night? Colin asked. Tomorrow night, she confirmed. He nodded, gave her another one of those devastating smiles, and walked out of the cafe before she could change her mind. Anabelle remained behind the counter, trying to process what had just happened. She had a date with Colin tomorrow, and for the first time in a long time, instead of fear, all she felt was anticipation. Who are you? The question hung in the air, soft, low, but carrying a gravity that reached deeper than either of them expected. Anabelle hesitated. No one had ever asked her that like that before, not as a formality, not as a passing curiosity, but as if the answer genuinely mattered, as if she genuinely mattered. She looked around the empty cafe, the warm amber light over the counter, the faint scent of roasted beans, the faint hum of the fridge in the background, and finally let out a small breath. I'm someone who still believes in small things, she said quietly, in mornings that start devagar, with the smell of coffee, in people who say okay sentem, mesmo quando dá medo, in work that has meaning, in love that doesn't need to be grand, just real. Her eyes met his. I'm not impressive, Colin. I'm not ambitious like you were in Los Angeles. I don't have a master plan for my life, but I care about people, about doing things with heart. And sometimes I think that tem mais valor do que tudo que o mundo tenta vender como sucesso. He didn't speak for a moment. He just looked at her, as if every word she'd said had stripped another layer of the world he'd built around himself. Then, slowly, he stepped closer until the space between them was filled only by breath and possibility. You're wrong about one thing, he murmured. Oh? She managed, her voice soft. You are impressive. You just don't try to be. Anabelle felt the warmth rise in her chest, spreading slowly, dissolving every bit of anxiety she'd felt earlier. She tried to smile, but the emotion in his voice made her throat tighten. You really know what to say, don't you? He smiled faintly. Not usually, but right now, yeah, I think I do. They stood there for a while, close enough to feel the heat of each other's bodies, but far enough to still pretend it was innocent. The silence wasn't awkward. It was charged, alive, full of what neither dared to name. Finally, Colin cleared his throat, breaking the moment just enough. Ready to go? Where are we going? He gave that familiar half-smile, the one that always looked like it hid more than it revealed. You'll see. She locked the cafe and followed him to the car, the evening light painting the sky in strokes of gold and rose. As he opened the passenger door for her, she noticed the faint tremor in his hand. The realization hit her quietly. He was nervous too. When he rounded the car and sat beside her, the engine hummed to life, and the world outside began to blur as they drove through the coastal roads of Santa Barbara. The ocean came into view not long after, wide, endless, reflecting the last light of day. He parked near a lookout where the cliffs met the sea, and the waves crashed below with hypnotic rhythm. You brought me here for the view? She asked, teasing. He shook his head. I brought you here because it's quiet, and because I wanted to see if the ocean looks different when I'm not drowning in it. Anabelle turned to him, not sure if he was being poetic or painfully honest. Does it? He looked at her then, really looked. Yeah, it does. For a long time they didn't speak. The sound of the sea filled the silence, vast and comforting. Then Colin leaned back against the hood of the car, gesturing for her to join him. She hesitated only for a second before climbing up beside him. Their shoulders brushed. Neither moved away. It's strange, he said after a while, his voice softer now. I spent so many years chasing noise, meetings, deadlines, airports, people who talk just to fill the air, and now I can't stop thinking about how good silence feels, especially with you. Anabelle smiled, eyes fixed on the horizon. Silence doesn't mean nothing's happening. Sometimes it's when the most important things do. Colin turned his head toward her. Like what? She met his gaze. Like this. He didn't move at first. He just watched her. The play of wind in her hair, the calm determination in her voice, the quiet certainty in her eyes. And then, as if drawn by gravity itself, he leaned in. The kiss was not rushed. It was inevitable. Soft at first. Testing. A question and an answer at the same time. Then deeper, warmer. like two people who had spent too long pretending they weren't already falling. When they finally parted, the sound of the waves seemed to rise around them as if the whole ocean had been waiting for that moment. Colin's forehead rested against hers, breath uneven. "I told myself I wouldn't do this tonight." Anabelle smiled faintly, still catching her breath. "Then it's a good thing I'm not very good at following rules either." He laughed quietly, the sound low and disbelieving. "God, you're trouble." "Maybe." Her smile widened, but the good kind. And as the night deepened around them, Santa Barbara fading into the distance, both of them knew, whatever this was, however complicated it became, it had already begun. He grinned, the corner of his mouth curving with that disarming mix of mischief and sincerity that made her knees weak. "Usually," he said, voice low and teasing, "but you bring out the worst in my self-control." "Good," she whispered, still breathless, a smile trembling on her lips, "because I don't think I'd like you so much if you were perfectly behaved." He let out a quiet laugh, that kind that starts deep in the chest, and brushed a strand of hair from her cheek with his thumb. "Careful, Anabelle. You say things like that, and you'll end up rewriting all my rules." "Maybe they needed rewriting," she murmured. He looked at her for a long moment, that silence between them expanding until the air itself seemed charged with electricity. Then slowly, he stepped back, giving her the space to breathe again. "Dinner," he said finally, exhaling as if reminding himself of the concept. "Before I make even worse decisions in your café." She smiled, still dizzy, still tasting him. "Where are we going?" "You'll see." He offered his hand, and when she took it, her fingers fit perfectly against his. The touch sent another wave of warmth through her, something fragile and thrilling all at once. Outside, the night had fallen softly over Santa Barbara. The streets were calm, lamps glowing gold, ocean breeze carrying the faint scent of salt and jasmine. Colin opened the car. Doctor for her, a simple gesture that suddenly felt intimate. As they drove along the coastal road, the silence between them was anything but empty. It pulsed with everything unspoken, with the memory of that kiss still alive between them, with the quiet wonder of two people who knew something irreversible had just begun. He parked near the pier, where the sound of the waves mixed with the distant laughter of people dining by the sea. The restaurant was small, lit by candles, with wooden tables and big open windows framing the ocean. "This is perfect," she said softly, surprised. "I did my research," he replied, pulling out her chair with an exaggerated flourish that made her laugh. "I was told Santa Barbara women prefer charm over chandeliers." "Who told you is so?" "Your mother. She said it very clearly while threatening to check in halfway through dinner to make sure I wasn't being a jerk." Anabelle laughed, shaking her head. "That sounds like her." "Honestly," he said, lowering his voice, "I don't blame her. If I had a daughter like you, I'd probably threaten every man who came near her too." Her laughter faded into a smile that lingered between amusement and something deeper. "You're not helping my heart calm down, you know." He leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on the table, eyes never leaving hers. "Then I guess we're even, because mine hasn't been calm since Tuesday." The waiter came, breaking the spell, and they ordered wine and pasta. Conversation flowed easier than either expected. They talked about music, about books, about the strangest customers she'd ever had at the cafe, and the most ridiculous meetings he'd survived in Los Angeles. Each story peeled away another layer, until the formality dissolved and what remained was something raw, real, and magnetic. At one point, she caught him watching her, not like a man admiring a woman's beauty, but like someone quietly realizing he'd stumbled upon something rare. "What?" she asked, smiling nervously. "Nothing," he said, shaking his head. "Just, I'd forgotten how it feels to actually enjoy someone's company. No agenda, no mask." She looked down at her glass, tracing the rim with her finger. "You wear masks often?" "Used to," he admitted. "In LA, it's almost a requirement. Success looks better when you're pretending not to break. And now? Now I'm trying to unlearn that." He smiled faintly. "You help." Something fluttered in her chest. Soft, dangerous, undeniable. After dinner, they walked along the pier. The night was crisp, the sky scattered with stars, the sea dark and infinite beneath them. Colin's hand brushed against hers once, twice, until she finally intertwined their fingers. It felt natural, inevitable. They stopped near the railing, watching the water shimmer under the moonlight. "This doesn't feel like a first date," she said quietly. He turned his head, his gaze steady. "Maybe because we've been trying not to have it for weeks." She smiled, leaning her shoulder against his arm. "Do you think we're crazy?" "Definitely." His voice was low, a smile hidden behind it. "But I've been sane for most of my life, and it was highly overrated." Anabelle laughed softly, then fell silent again, the sound of the waves filling the space between them. When she looked up at him, his expression had softened, less guarded, more open than she'd ever seen. And for the first time, she didn't feel like the girl who made coffee for everyone else's stories. She felt like she was finally living her own. He raised her hand, kissed her knuckles slowly. "Thank you," he murmured. "For what?" "For reminding me that being alive can feel like this." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Because when he looked at her again, when the world seemed to fall away into the rhythm of the sea, she already knew. Whatever this was, reckless, complicated, terrifying, it was also the most real thing either of them had felt in a long, long time. "I'm trying. You just make everything harder." "Good." He shook his head, still smiling, and laced his fingers through hers. "Come on, I picked a place. Hopefully the food's good, because after that kiss I'll need a lot of energy to behave for the rest of the night." Anabelle led him out of the café, locking the door behind them. They walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of Santa Barbara toward the small Italian restaurant he had chosen, a familiar, cozy spot where the food was homemade, and the atmosphere seemed designed for long, unhurried conversations. They sat at a table tucked in the corner, ordered wine and dinner, and finally did what they had come to do, truly get to know each other. Colin told her about Los Angeles, how he had started out excited, full of ambition and drive, and how little by little it had turned into a machine that consumed him. He told her about 12-hour meetings, about decisions that affected hundreds of people, about the pressure of always having to be right, to win, to perform. "At first, I loved it," he admitted, swirling the wine in his glass. "The adrenaline, the competition, the rush of building something big. But at some point, I don't even know when exactly, it started to feel empty, like I was running a marathon in circles. So much motion, no real progress." "And the panic attack?" He was quiet for a moment, as if deciding how much to share. "It was on a regular day, board meeting. I was presenting quarterly results, something I'd done hundreds of times before, and suddenly, the walls started closing in. The air got thin. My heart was racing so fast I thought I was having a heart attack." He exhaled shakily. "I had to walk out of the room in the middle of my presentation, locked myself in the restroom trying to breathe, terrified I was going to die there, alone, surrounded by tile." Anabelle reached across the table, taking his hand in hers and intertwining their fingers. "That must have been terrifying." It was, but it was also a relief, because finally, my body screamed what my mind had been trying to ignore for months. It was killing me. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, mentally. It was. "And now? Are you going back?" Colin held her gaze, and there was a quiet certainty there. "No, not like that. Maybe I'll find something here. Maybe I'll consult remotely. I don't know. But I know I can't live that life again. He paused. "I want to wake up and feel like the day matters, like the people around me matter, like I matter for more than what I produce." "You've always mattered, Colin. What you produce doesn't define your worth." He smiled softly, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "I know, rationally, but believing it, that's still a work in progress." Then Anabelle told him about herself, about growing up in Santa Barbara, about her friendship with Liam that had defined so much of her teenage years, about the quiet pressure of following the path her parents had built through the café. "I love that place," she said honestly, "but sometimes I wonder if it's real love or just comfort, safety, fear of trying something else and failing. What would you try if fear wasn't part of the equation?" She thought for a long moment. "I don't know. Maybe travel, see the world beyond Santa Barbara, meet different people, different cultures. Or maybe," she laughed a little, embarrassed, "this is going to sound silly. Nothing you say could sound silly. Sometimes I think about writing, not professionally, just writing about the stories I hear at the café, about the people who come through every day. There's so much humanity in that place. So much life, and I think it deserves to be told." Colin looked at her with that intensity she was already learning to love. Then right. "It's not that simple." "It could be, if you let it." They ate, drank wine, laughed over small stories, and shared memories they'd never told anyone else. And somewhere between the appetizer and the dessert, Anabelle realized that this, the easy conversation, the genuine connection, the feeling of being fully seen and accepted, was what she had been waiting for all along. When they left the restaurant, the night was cool and clear, the sky scattered with stars. Colin wrapped an arm around her as they walked, and Anabelle fit against him as if she had always belonged there. "This was the best first date of my life," he said softly. "Mine too," she admitted. "But to be fair, it's my first real first date." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "Seriously? Seriously, I've gone out with a few guys before, but nothing like this, nothing that made me feel—" She searched for the right words. "Like I finally understood what it's supposed to feel like." Colin touched her face, his thumb, tracing the line of her jaw. "And what are you feeling right now?" "That I want to do this again and again and again, until you get tired of me." He smiled, leaning in to kiss her again. Softly this time, tenderly, full of promise. "That's never going to happen." They walked back to his car, and when he dropped her off at her house, they stayed parked for another 10 minutes, talking through the open window, neither of them wanting the night to end. "Will I see you tomorrow?" Colin asked at last. "Tomorrow and the day after and the next one," she said, smiling. "Fair warning, I'm going to be very hard to get rid of now." "Perfect," he said, grinning, "because I have absolutely no intention of trying." She leaned through the window and kissed him one more time, quick, sweet, and then stepped back before she could lose the courage to leave. Colin waited until she went inside, waved through the glass, and only then drove away. Anabelle pressed her back against the closed door, her fingers brushing her lips, still tasting him there, and she knew, with that absolute terrifying certainty, that she had fallen in love, completely, irrevocably, no way back. And for the first time in her life, that didn't scare her, because Colin had fallen too. She'd seen it in his eyes, felt it in the way he touched her, the way he looked at her, the way he spoke her name. And this was only the beginning. 2 weeks had passed since that first date by the beach, and Anabelle could still taste that kiss every time she closed her eyes. They had gone out 3 more times since then. Dinner at a quiet little Italian restaurant Colin had discovered. A long walk along the shoreline at sunset, fingers intertwined, talking about everything and nothing. And one entire Saturday spent at his apartment, watching old movies neither of them paid much attention to, too busy discovering each other instead. But they were still careful, discreet, not because they were ashamed, but because they wanted to protect what they were building. They wanted to be certain it was real before letting the world see, especially their families, who already had opinions about everything. Liam knew, of course. It was impossible to hide anything from him. But there was a silent agreement that he would pretend not to notice until they were ready to make it official. And Colin was discovering things about Anabelle that made him fall even harder. With every passing day, he learned that she hummed when she was focused, usually the same songs playing on the café radio, and that she was slightly off-key, but in the most endearing way, that she bit her lower lip when she was nervous, and he'd begun to recognize that gesture as a signal that he needed to ask what was wrong, that she organized the world through lists of chores, grocery lists of things she wanted to do before turning 30, and he found that both practical and completely charming. He learned that she was afraid of disappointing people, especially her parents, that she dreamed of traveling, but felt guilty for wanting to leave the cafe, that she wrote terrible poetry at 3 in the morning when she couldn't sleep and hid her notebooks out of embarrassment. "Can I read them?" he had asked one night when she mentioned the notebooks in passing. "No," she replied far too quickly. "They're awful." "I doubt that. They are. I promise." That makes people cringe with secondhand embarrassment. "Then show me. I want all the secondhand embarrassment you got." She laughed but didn't show them. Not yet. But the fact that he wanted to, the fact that he wanted to see every piece of her, even the ones she kept hidden, warmed her heart in a way she couldn't describe. And Anabelle was discovering Colin too, the layers behind his calm, confident exterior. She learned that he woke up early, always before 6, not because he had to, but because his body had been trained that way after years of a corporate routine he was trying to unlearn, that he drank his coffee black and far too strong, and she teased him about it, giving him an ulcer, to which he replied that weak coffee was an insult to the very concept of the drink. She learned that he had nightmares sometimes, not every night, but enough for her to notice when they slept together. He would wake up suddenly, breathing hard, needing a few seconds to remember where he was. He never talked about them, but she knew they were tied to Los Angeles, to the pressure, to the life he had left behind. She learned that he was thoughtful in ways that caught her off guard. He remembered the smallest details she mentioned, like when she said her back hurt from standing all day, and he showed up with an anti-fatigue mat for her to use behind the counter. When she mentioned a book she wanted to read, 3 days later he appeared with a copy, already marked with passages he thought she'd love, and she saw that he was scared. Scared that it was too good to be true, scared of ruining it, scared that she'd see how much of a mess he really was inside and decide he wasn't worth the effort. "Hey," she said one night when they were lying on his couch, her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart beneath her palm. "You know you don't have to be perfect, right?" Colin tensed slightly. "What do you mean?" "You do this thing. You try to control everything. To be the perfect boyfriend, to say the right things, plan the perfect dates." She sat up just enough to meet his eyes. "But I don't need perfect. I just need real." He held her gaze for a long moment. "And what if real is messy? Then it's messy and we deal with it together. And what if I don't know how to do that? Relationships were never my strong suit. I always ran when things got too serious." "Are you running now?" "No," he said immediately, his voice steady. "Definitely not. If anything, it's the opposite. I want to stay so badly it scares me." "Then stay," she whispered, touching his face, her thumb tracing the edge of his jaw. "Stay messy, stay imperfect, stay with nightmares and coffee that's way too strong. Stay exactly as you are, because you are what I want, not some edited version." Colin pulled her into a kiss that was gratitude and relief and love all at once. When they finally parted, he whispered against her lips, "I love you." They were the first words that came easily, without fear, without calculation. "I love you too," she replied, and something deep inside her settled into place, as if everything finally fit exactly where it was meant to be. A month had passed since that first date, and what they had built had grown naturally, organically. Colin came to the café every morning, always on time, always with that small smile meant only for her. He sat on the stool. In the corner, working on his laptop, he had started doing remote consulting, taking only projects that genuinely mattered, and every time she walked by, he found an excuse to touch her. A brush of fingers when she handed him his cup, a fleeting touch on her hand when she set down his coffee. Little gestures that spoke louder than words. The nights were theirs. Quiet dinners, conversations that stretched until dawn, kisses that made the world stop spinning. They hadn't slept together. Yet, not completely, not in the way they both wanted, but that Anabelle wasn't ready for. And Colin respected that in a way that made her love him even more. "There's no rush," he had said one night, when they'd been teetering on that edge between control and surrender, and she had hesitated, breath uneven, uncertain. "We've got all the time in the world." "You don't mind?" she'd asked. "Mind?" He'd laughed softly, kissing her forehead. "Of course I mind. You drive me absolutely insane. But I respect you more than any temporary discomfort. When it's the right time, it'll be perfect. Until then, I'll wait." And he waited, with patience, with respect, in a way that made Anabelle feel cherished in a way she had never experienced before. But there was a growing pressure that both of them could feel, the pressure of secrecy, of stolen moments, of avoiding places where familiar faces might ask questions, of harmless little lies like, "Where were you last night?" when her mother asked, and Colin was getting tired of it. He wanted to hold her hand in public without worry. He wanted to take her to dinner with his family without pretending they were just friends. He wanted the whole world to know that she was his, and that he was hers. And more than that, he knew what he wanted. He knew it with the kind of certainty that didn't waver or question. Anabelle was it, the one. There was no doubt, no hesitation. He wanted to do things the right way, the way she Deserved, the way her parents had raised her to believe love should happen. So, on a Thursday afternoon, Colin did something that made him more nervous than any multi-million-dollar deal he had ever closed in Los Angeles. He called Ezra and Megan and asked if he could speak with them. "It's about Anabelle," he said when Megan answered, "and about something I'd like to ask your permission to do." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line, and then Megan laughed softly, the gentle, knowing sound of a mother who already understood exactly what was coming. "We thought you'd never ask, dear. Come for dinner tomorrow. We'll talk." And in that moment, Colin knew the next step was about to unfold, the step that would make everything official, the step that would turn what was hidden into something declared, the step that would change everything, and he could hardly wait. The days went by, and Colin was nervous. Not the kind of nervous he used to feel before. Major presentations or multi-million-dollar deals. That kind he knew how to handle, how to control his breathing, organize his thoughts, and project confidence even when his stomach was twisting in knots. But this was different. This was asking the parents of the woman he loved for her hand. The traditional way, the right way, the way that mattered. He was standing in front of the Holland house on a Saturday afternoon, holding a bottle of wine Ezra liked. He'd discreetly asked Megan about it weeks earlier, and trying to remember how to form coherent sentences. He'd rehearsed, of course. Naturally, he had. He'd written 3 mental versions of his speech, each one more formal than the last, until he realized how ridiculous it was, and that he just needed to be honest. Honest about how much he loved Anabelle, about his intentions, about the kind of man he wanted to be for her. He rang the doorbell, and seconds later Megan opened the door, already smiling, that knowing, motherly smile of someone who understood exactly what was about to happen. "Colin, what a lovely surprise," she said, though her tone made it clear she wasn't surprised in the least. "Come in, dear." "Hi, Megan, thank you." He stepped inside, handing her the wine. "I brought this. I know Ezra likes it." "How thoughtful." She took the bottle, glanced at the label, then looked back at him with a spark of warmth in her eyes. "Ezra's in his office. Do you want me to call him?" "Please. If it's not an inconvenience." "Inconvenience?" Megan chuckled softly. "Sweetheart, I think the 3 of you need to talk. I'll get him and make some coffee. Or would you prefer something stronger, considering the occasion?" Colin gave a nervous laugh. "Coffee's perfect." Megan disappeared down the hallway, and Colin stood there in the Hollands' familiar living room, a room he'd spent plenty of time in over the last few months, but that suddenly felt different, more meaningful, because what he was about to do would change everything. Ezra appeared a few moments later, and there was something in his expression that told Colin Megan had already given him a quiet warning. Ezra was of average height, broad-shouldered, the kind of strength that came from a life of hands-on work even though he was an engineer. His hair was silver, his eyes kind but perceptive. "Colin." He offered his hand, and the shake was firm yet warm. "Megan said you wanted to talk." "Yes, sir, if you have a moment." "I always have time." Ezra gestured toward the sofa. "Sit, make yourself comfortable." They sat, and Megan returned with coffee for all 3, placing the cups neatly on the table before settling beside her husband. She wasn't about to miss this conversation. Colin noticed and didn't mind. It felt right. Anabelle was their daughter. They both deserved to hear this. Colin took a steadying breath, picked up the cup more for something to do with his hands than because he wanted coffee, and began. "I know you've known my family for years. You know who I am, or at least who I was before I came back to Santa Barbara." He paused. "But I think it's important you know who I am now, and what Anabelle means to me." Ezra and Megan stayed silent, listening intently. "When I left Los Angeles, I was broken. Not physically, but emotionally, mentally. I'd built a life that looked successful from the outside, but was completely hollow on the inside, and I didn't know how to fix it, or if it could even be fixed." He set the cup back down, needing his hands free to gesture, to let the words come alive. "And then I met Anabelle, or rather, I recognized her, because I vaguely remembered her from years ago, always hanging around Liam, always laughing, always full of opinions. But she wasn't that girl anymore. She is, an extraordinary woman, smart, genuine in a way I hadn't seen in anyone for years." He smiled faintly. and she put me in my place. The very first day, she wasn't impressed by anything I tried to project. She just saw me, really saw me. Megan was smiling now, eyes glistening. Ezra remained serious, but there was depth there. Something steady, measuring. In these past months, she's shown me what it means to live. Not perform, not pretend, just be. And I fell in love, completely, in a way I didn't even know was possible. Colin met Ezra's gaze unwavering. I love your daughter, sir. I love the way she sees the world. I love her kindness disguised as sarcasm. I love how deeply she cares about people even when she pretends not to. I love her courage, even when she's terrified. And I want to spend the rest of my life proving she was right to give me a chance. Ezra leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, studying Colin for a long, quiet moment. You're asking for my permission to court her properly? Yes, sir, Colin said. The right way. The way you and Megan taught her to expect. Ezra exchanged a look with Megan, and some unspoken communication passed between them. Then he turned back to Colin. My daughter is the most important person in my life, he said, voice steady but laced with emotion. I've spent 23 years protecting her, guiding her, trying to give her every tool she'd need to be happy and strong. And these last few months, I've seen her happier than I've ever seen her. Because of you. A tightness caught in Colin's chest. I see the way you… Look at her, Ezra went on. And it's not the look of a man who's passing the time or testing the waters. It's the look of someone who's found what he was searching for and doesn't intend to let go. He paused. You have my blessing, Colin, and my respect. Take care of her, honor her, and never make her doubt her worth. Never, Colin said firmly. She's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Megan stood, walked over, and wrapped her arms around him in a heartfelt embrace. Welcome to the family, dear, she said softly. Officially now. Colin returned the hug, feeling a rush of relief and happiness so deep it almost didn't fit inside him. Ezra stood as well, offering his hand once more. But when Colin shook it, Ezra pulled him into a quick, meaningful hug. Just one more thing, Ezra said, stepping back and meeting his eyes. You're doing this in front of both families, right? The traditional way? Colin smiled. Yes, sir. I wouldn't do it any other. Eh? Good. Because Megan's already planning the dinner in her head. He glanced at his wife with the affectionate grin of a man who'd known every detail of her for decades. Megan laughed softly, her eyes glistening. I am. And it's going to be perfect. And it was. A week later, on a Friday evening, both families gathered at the Thompsons' house. Emma had insisted on hosting. It's the Suitors family tradition, and had spent the entire day preparing an elaborate meal involving at least 3 types of meat, 4 side dishes, and 2 desserts. Anabelle had no idea what was about to happen. She thought it was just another family dinner, the kind that had become routine. She looked effortlessly beautiful, wearing a simple navy blue dress, her hair loose, just a touch of makeup. And she was helping Emma set the table when Colin walked into the dining room. He was nervous, she noticed immediately. There was something in his posture, the way his hand brushed through. His hair that told her something important was coming. Are you all right? She whispered when she passed by him. He caught her hand, giving it a gentle squeeze. Perfect. Just nervous. Why? He smiled faintly. You'll see. Dinner was as delicious and noisy as always. Overlapping conversations, bursts of laughter, Liam cracking jokes that made everyone roll their eyes but laugh anyway. Anabelle was relaxed, happy, blissfully unaware of what was coming. Then, when dessert was, served and everyone was full and content, Colin stood up. He tapped his wine glass lightly with a spoon to get everyone's attention. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to him. Anabelle frowned, puzzled. Colin, what? But then he moved. He stepped away from his chair, walked around the table, and knelt beside her. Anabelle's heart stopped. What are you doing? She whispered, her pulse racing. Colin took both her hands in his, holding them firmly, his gaze locked on hers. Anabelle, these past few months you've changed my life in every possible way. You've shown me what it means to live with purpose, to love for real, to wake up every day and feel like everything makes sense. His voice was steady but full of emotion. And I don't want another day without you. I don't want to wake up without knowing you're mine. I don't want to fall asleep without knowing we're building something lasting together. He released one of her hands and reached into his. pocket, pulling out a small velvet box. Anabelle covered her mouth with her free hand, her heart pounding so hard she could barely breathe. "I already asked your parents for their blessing," Colin continued, glancing briefly at Ezra and Megan before returning his full attention to her. "Because I wanted to do this the right way, the way you deserve." He opened the box, revealing a delicate yet stunning ring, rose gold with a single diamond that caught the light like fire. "So now I'm asking you in front of everyone we love, Anabelle Holland, will you be my girlfriend, officially, seriously, with the promise that we'll build a future together?" Anabelle looked at the ring, then at Colin, then at the families around them, and finally, she looked back at him, the man who had walked into her life like a quiet storm and changed everything. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Colin smiled, that full, devastating smile of pure relief and joy, and slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he stood, pulled her up with him, and kissed her. It was a gentle, tender kiss overflowing with promise, and when they pulled apart, the room erupted in applause and cheers. Emma rushed forward to hug them both, crying something about, "My boys have found love," while Jason clapped Colin proudly on the shoulder. Megan wrapped her daughter in her arms, whispering through happy tears, "I told you he'd do it." Ezra shook Colin's hand again, that firm grip, saying, "You did right. You honored her." And Liam, who had been standing in the back watching everything, finally stepped forward and hugged them both at once. "You two are ridiculous," he said, though his grin was so wide it nearly split his face. "Ridiculously perfect." "So you approve?" Anabelle asked, wiping her tears. "I do, reluctantly, but I do." He kissed her forehead. "Just don't get too mushy in front of me because I still have limits." "No promises," Colin said, pulling Anabelle closer. The rest of the night blurred into celebration. Champagne was opened, toasts were made, stories were told. Emma was already planning the next step. "I'm not saying it has to be soon, but when you do decide to get married, I'm helping with every single detail." And Megan was happily agreeing, while Ezra and Jason laughed at their wives' excitement. At some point, amid the joyful chaos, Colin pulled Anabelle into the quietest corner of the room and simply held her. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what? For giving me a chance, for seeing something in me worth believing in, for teaching me how to live again." Anabelle touched his face, her thumb tracing the line of his jaw. "You don't need to thank me for making the easiest choice of my life." She smiled softly. "I love you, and this is only the beginning." "Only the beginning," he echoed, leaning in to kiss her again. And there, surrounded by family, by love, by promises of a shared future, Anabelle and Colin knew they had found exactly what they'd been searching for, without even realizing it. They had found each other, and more importantly, they had found home. 6 months had passed since that night when Colin knelt before both families and asked the question that turned 2 separate paths into one. Autumn had arrived in Santa Barbara with that unmistakable California softness, not the sharp chill the rest of the country endured, but a gentle breeze that made mornings pleasant and sunsets breathtaking. The sky painted itself each evening in hues of orange, pink, and gold, so vivid they looked as though they had been brushed there by hand. Anabelle and Colin had built a life together that was both simple and extraordinary. He had officially cut all ties with Los Angeles, establishing his consulting work fully remote, taking on only the clients and projects that truly mattered to him, rather than those that merely paid well. She still worked at Sunset, Beans, but now with a new confidence. She had started implementing fresh ideas, hosting themed events and poetry nights that had quickly become surprisingly popular. And at night, she wrote. The notebook Colin had given her was nearly full of stories she finally had the courage to put into words. They had dinner together every evening, whether at his apartment, which was technically their apartment now, since she spent more time there than at her own, or at their parents' houses because family remained an essential part of who they were. They talked about everything, about their days, about dreams, about small frustrations and quiet victories. He listened when she vented about difficult customers. She listened when he confessed the stress of certain projects. And in the end, they always wound up tangled together on the couch, her head resting on his chest, his heartbeat more interesting than anything on television. Liam, who had initially joked about being the forgotten third wheel, had actually grown closer to both of them. They had weekly dinners, an easy rhythm where he wasn't just Anabelle's best friend or Colin's younger brother anymore, but an integral part of a trio that worked perfectly. Megan watched everything with that satisfied mother's smile, making gentle comments like, "So, when are you two taking the next step?" whenever she got the chance. Emma was far less subtle. She literally asked when she'd get a wedding to plan at you. At least once a week. And Colin had a plan. 9 months had passed since they'd officially started dating, and Colin knew, with absolute, unshakable certainty, that Anabelle was the one. There was no doubt, no hesitation, only an ever-growing need to make it permanent in every possible way. He had bought the ring 3 weeks earlier, gone by himself, because it was something he needed to do alone, but he had discreetly asked Megan's opinion about the kind of design Anabelle would love. It was tucked away in his sock drawer, inside a small red velvet box, waiting for the right moment, and that moment had arrived. It was a Friday evening. Colin had told Anabelle he wanted to take her to dinner somewhere special. She had arched a suspicious eyebrow. "You're acting strange," but had agreed, getting ready with that quiet care she always had when she sensed something meaningful was coming. She was wearing a dress he loved, a deep wine color that made her skin glow and her eyes look impossibly vivid. Her hair was down in soft waves, her makeup light, and she wore that scent he had come to associate with home. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" she asked as they got into the car. "No," he said with a teasing smile, taking her hand and intertwining their fingers. "Do you trust me?" "Always." He drove in silence, soft music playing through the radio, and Anabelle soon realized they were heading toward the beach. When he parked near the pier, where they had walked countless times before, she turned to him, half curious, half suspicious. "Colin, what are you up to?" "Nothing," he said, smiling. "I just want to walk with you before dinner." They got out of the car and Colin grabbed a backpack from the back seat, something that only deepened her curiosity, and guided her down the sand. The sun was beginning to set, casting that magical golden light that exists only in those perfect minutes between day and night. When they reached a particular spot along the beach, a quiet area away from the bustle of the pier, Anabelle stopped dead in her tracks. There was a blanket laid out on the sand. Candles enclosed in glass holders formed a soft circle around it. A picnic basket sat nearby. Rose petals were scattered delicately, tastefully, not overdone but undeniably romantic. "Colin," she whispered, turning to him, her eyes already glistening. "What is all this?" He set the backpack down, took her hands, and led her to the center of the little haven he'd set up with Liam's help earlier that afternoon. "Sit with me," he said softly. They sat on the blanket facing each other, and Colin opened the basket, taking out champagne, strawberries, cheeses, all her favorites. But Anabelle could barely focus on the food. She was watching him with that look that said, "I know something big is happening, but I don't know what yet." Colin poured the champagne, handed her a glass, and held up his own. "To the right moment," he said. "To the right moment," she echoed, still smiling, still confused. They took a sip, and then he set his glass aside, taking both of her hands again. "Do you remember the first time we saw each other? At the café?" Anabelle smiled. "I do. You were being arrogant, and I put you in your place." "Exactly. And right then, I knew you were different. There was something about you I couldn't ignore, but I was too scared to admit it." He stroked her fingers with his thumbs. "And then there was the balcony. That moment when I almost kissed you but didn't have the courage." "I remember that too," she said quietly. "I stayed up all night wondering what would have happened if you had." "So did I. And then came our first date, when I finally kissed you and knew for sure that I never wanted to kiss anyone else again. Colin, these past months you've shown me what real love is. Not the convenient kind or the shallow attraction kind, but the kind that transforms, the kind that heals, the kind that makes you want to become a better version of yourself every single day." He released one of her hands to reach into his pocket and pull out a small box. "And I don't want another day to pass without knowing you're mine. I don't want to call you my girlfriend anymore. I want to call you my fiancée, my wife, the mother of my children, my partner in life, my everything." He opened the box, revealing a breathtaking ring, white gold with a central diamond surrounded by smaller stones forming a delicate pattern of intertwined flowers. It was classic, yet unique, exactly like her. "Anabelle Holland," Colin said, his voice thick with emotion, stripped of all the composure she was used to. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me? Will you be mine forever?" Anabelle was trembling now, tears welling in her eyes. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, yes, yes, always yes." Colin slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit, perfectly, as if it had been made just for her, then pulled her into a kiss that was both urgent and tender, filled with promise, with future, with everything still to come. When they finally parted, she looked down at the ring, then back up at him, laughing through her tears. "You planned all of this? With Liam's help." He knew. Everyone knew. "I asked your father's blessing before I did this, because making it official in the right way means something, and I wanted to honor you and your family by doing it properly." She kissed him again, softer this time, and rested her forehead against his. "I love you so much it scares me." "Good," he smiled, "because I love you more." They stayed there as the sun disappeared completely, eating strawberries, sipping champagne, making half-serious plans about the wedding, laughing about small things, simply existing inside that perfect bubble of happiness. When they finally walked back to the car, Anabelle stopped, before getting in and looked at him over the roof. "When do you want to get married?" Colin thought for a moment. "Tomorrow, if it were up to me. But I know your mother and mine will want to plan things. So, 6 months? A year? 6 months, she said firmly. I don't want to wait any longer than that. 6 months it is. And it was exactly 6 months. 6 months after that night on the beach, Anabelle stood in the dressing room of the small church her parents attended, staring at her reflection and trying to believe it was real. The dress was simple but absolutely perfect. Delicate lace, a cut that hugged her figure elegantly, a modest train, and a soft tulle veil that Megan was adjusting with trembling hands and tear-filled eyes. "You're the most beautiful bride I've ever seen," Megan whispered, her voice shaky with emotion. "Mom, if you make me cry, I'll ruin the makeup. I don't care. This is exactly the kind of moment where tears are mandatory." She took her daughter's shoulders, turning her gently to face her. "Are you ready?" "More ready than I've ever been." "Does he make you happy?" "Ridiculously happy." "Then that's all that matters." Megan kissed her forehead. "Let's go. Your father's waiting to walk you to the man of your life." The ceremony was small, just family and their closest friends, exactly as they wanted. The church was adorned with white and yellow flowers, soft candles, and an atmosphere that felt sacred, timeless. When the music began and the doors opened, Anabelle saw Colin waiting at the altar, and the entire world disappeared. He stood there in a navy blue suit, matching tie, hair perfectly in place but with that hint of rebellion she adored. And when his eyes met hers, she saw everything she needed to see: love, promise, future, certainty. Ezra walked her down the aisle, and she could barely feel her legs. She was floating. When they reached the altar and Ezra placed her hand in, "Collins," she heard her father whisper, "take care of her." "Always," Colin promised, his voice steady. The ceremony was beautiful and deeply emotional. Liam was, of course, the best man, delivering a speech that balanced humor and heart so perfectly that everyone laughed and cried at once. Emma was sobbing in the front row. Jason held her hand, smiling with fatherly pride. Megan and Ezra sat together, arms wrapped around each other, watching their daughter marry the man who had proved himself worthy of her. And when the officiant finally said, "You may kiss the bride," Colin pulled Anabelle close and kissed her in a way that made the entire room erupt in applause and sighs. "My wife," he murmured against her lips. "My husband," she replied, smiling so wide it made her cheeks ache. The reception took place in the Thompsons' garden, magically decorated with fairy lights strung between trees, elegant tables and flowers everywhere. There was dancing, laughter, heartfelt toasts, and that unmistakable feeling that everything was exactly as it should be. When Colin and Anabelle finally managed to sneak away for a few quiet minutes, escaping to a secluded corner of the garden, he pulled her close and simply held her. "Thank you for marrying me," he said softly. "Thank you for asking. Thank you for seeing something in me that was worth loving." "It was always worth it," she said, touching his face. "And it always will be." They kissed. There, away from everyone else, just the two of them, for the first time as husband and wife. And it was perfect. 2 years had passed in a blur of everyday happiness. They had moved into a charming house near the beach. Nothing extravagant, but with enough room to grow, to host family, to build memories. Colin had turned one of the rooms into an office. Anabelle had transformed another into a writing nook, where she continued filling notebooks with stories that a few local magazines had now begun to publish. Sunset Beans was still thriving, but Anabelle had hired more staff, allowing her the freedom to do other things, to live, to create, to simply be with her husband without the constant weight of work. And then, one spring morning, 3 years after that first meeting at the café, Anabelle woke up feeling different. She was nauseous, tired in a way no amount of coffee could fix. And when she did the math in her head, she realized she was late, very late. The pregnancy test confirmed what, deep down, she already knew. Because women know. She was pregnant. She stared at the 2 pink lines for a full 5 minutes, trying to process, and then started laughing and crying at the same time. Colin was in his office working when she walked in, hiding the test behind her back. "Can I interrupt?" He looked up from his laptop and smiled. "Always. What's up? I have news. Good or bad? That depends on your perspective." She stepped closer, heart racing. "Have you ever thought about baby names?" Colin blinked. Once, twice, and then he understood. He shot up from his chair so fast it nearly toppled. You're pregnant?" She pulled the test from behind her back and showed him. "I am." He looked at the test, then at her, then back at the test again, before scooping her up and spinning her around, laughing and crying all at once. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice breaking into joy. "We're having a baby." "We are," she confirmed, tears in her eyes now too. "We're pregnant." He set her down, dropped to his knees, placed his hands over her still flat stomach, and looked up at her with those green eyes filled with tears and wonder. "Hi, little one," he whispered. "I'm your dad, and I already love you so much." Anabelle ran her fingers through his hair, smiling. "You're going to be a great father." "I'll try," he said. "Every single day, I promise." The next 9 months were a whirlwind of motions, morning sickness that lasted all day, strange food cravings, and a growing excitement that rippled through both families. Emma had started knitting the moment she found out. Megan had bought out half a baby store. Ezra was building a crib. Jason was planning to teach the baby to fish the second they were old enough. Liam alternated between genuine excitement and joking that he'd be the cool uncle who teaches all the wrong things. And Colin never left her side. He went to every doctor's appointment, held her hand during ultrasounds, set up the nursery with his usual meticulous attention to detail, and read every book on fatherhood, as if preparing for the most important exam of his life. When they found out it was a boy, Colin cried. And when Anabelle suggested the name Daniel, Dan, after her late grandfather whom she had adored, he agreed instantly. Daniel Colin Thompson was born on an autumn dawn after 12 long hours of labor that tested them both, but ended with the most beautiful sound they had ever heard, the cry of their newborn son. Colin held his son for the first time and completely fell apart. Tears streamed down his face as he stared at the tiny, perfect being who was half him, half the woman he loved. "Hi, Daniel," he whispered, voice trembling. "Hi, my son. I'm your dad. And you're the most perfect thing that's ever existed." Anabelle, exhausted but radiant on the hospital bed, watched the scene with her heart overflowing. "He has your eyes," she murmured softly. "He has your nose," Colin replied, unable to stop smiling at their son. "He's perfect. Completely perfect." The families flooded into the hospital hours later, giving the new parents their first quiet moments, but eventually unable to contain their excitement. Emma cried so hard Jason had to fetch more tissues. Megan held her grandson with the tenderness of an experienced grandmother, whispering about how beautiful and strong he was. Ezra's eyes glistened with pride. Liam held Daniel for exactly 3 minutes before nervously handing him back, terrified of breaking him. And in that noisy, love-filled hospital room, Anabelle looked around and realized something. She had built exactly the life she'd always wanted but never knew how to describe. She had love. She had family, she had purpose, she had a partner who truly saw her and loved her completely. She had a son who carried the best of both of them. She had everything. 6 months later, on a quiet spring afternoon, Colin and Anabelle were in their backyard. Daniel lay on a blanket in the grass, eyes wide, watching the trees sway in the breeze and making those sweet baby noises that melted hearts. Colin was lying next to him, making silly faces that sent Daniel into fits of laughter. Anabelle sat nearby, watching the two men of her life, and felt that deep, unshakable peace that only comes when you know, without a doubt, you are exactly where you're meant to be. "What are you thinking about?" Colin asked, turning his head to look at her. "That I love you, that I love our son, that I love this life we've built." He sat up, lifting Daniel into his arms with the ease of a father who already knew exactly how to hold his child, and moved closer to her. "I do too," he said softly. "Every second of it." Daniel chose that moment to grab Colin's finger and squeeze, looking up at his father with those same green eyes and flashing a toothless, utterly devastating smile. "He's going to be a heartbreaker," Anabelle said, laughing. "Just like his dad," Colin teased. "Your ego still doesn't fit into small spaces, and you still find that irresistible." She kissed him, gentle, tender, and then the three of them stayed there in the sunlit yard, simply existing together, and Anabelle knew, with that deep, quiet certainty that comes from somewhere far inside the heart, that it had all been worth it. Every fear, every uncertainty, every bit of courage it took to take that first step, because it had led to this, to Colin, to Daniel, to a future bright and full of possibility, to a love that wasn't perfect, but was real, and real had always been all she ever wanted. The sun kept shining, the wind kept whispering softly through the trees, and in that small corner of the world, a family was complete, and forever had only just begun. And so ends the story of Anabelle and Colin, two hearts that found the truest kind of love in the most unlikely place. A 23-year-old woman and a 33-year-old man who proved that age difference means nothing when the connection is real, deep, and undeniable. If this love story moved you, leave your like and subscribe to the channel Paths of Romance for more passionate stories. Comment below and tell us what your favorite moment was. And don't forget to hype the video so this story can reach more people. Your participation is essential for the growth of our channel and for us to keep bringing you stories that touch the heart. See you in the next love story.